Our guest today works with underrepresented communities to create thoughtfully designed projects through research and advocacy. Yutaka Sho is a partner and co founder of General Architecture Collaborative that has planned, designed, and constructed residential health and educational projects in Rwanda since 2008. With the support of the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts, we speak to her about working in a context that has a history of genocide and colonization, and the challenges of working on ground at the grassroots level. I am Vaissnavi Shukla, and this is Architecture Off Center, a podcast where we highlight contemporary discourses that shape the built environment but do not occupy the center stage in our daily lives. We speak to radical designers, thinkers, and changemakers who are deeply engaged in redefining the way we live and interact with the world around us. The first thing that I wanted to lead with and ask you about was if you can share how you began your work in Rwanda back in 2008 and how or if the work that you started then had anything to do with responding to the aftermath of the genocide in the context that you were going to engage with.
Right. So it was in 2007, a friend of mine went to a gorilla trekking trip in Rwanda. They still have this preserved forest up north, and if you pay insane amount of money, you can go watch them. And she came back with a bunch of
You
photographs.
mean like literal gorillas, not like a
literally, yeah.
Okay.
Like
Sorry.
Gorillas are living there in the wild. And yeah, of course, gorillas are cute and everything. But it was the bunch of photographs that she brought back of the countryside in Rwanda. And I don't know if you've ever seen any pictures of the countryside there, but it's extremely hilly there, about 50% erosion prone. And even if it's not erosion prone, it's quite hilly. And that becomes a challenge later on when we started working there. But imagine a crate going to the horizon just like this, and somebody put a quilt over it, because about 80 to 90% of the Rwandan population is subsistent farmers. So they just farm whatever they eat on their land, and it's hilly again. So there are all these different shades of green patches going up and down, and it's just stunning. And they call their country where the gods go to sleep. Gods would roam around the world and have good time, but then at night they would come back and sleep in Rwanda. That's how beautiful it is. So that was basically the beginning. Just like any projects, it's really nothing. But then I started looking into it and learned about the genocide and how unique it was among all wars, because your house basically was the front line. So Rwanda has three main ethnicities: Tutsis, Hutus, and Twas. And Tutsis are about 15%, Hutus are about 85%, and Twas only make up 1%. So it doesn't really come into our story right now. But before the Belgians came in to colonize, they would intermarry, they would share cultures, they would speak the same language. And if a Hutu woman marries a Tutsi man, she would become a Tutsi, and vice versa. So it wasn't really an ethnicity per se. It was a social separation, perhaps. That was a political separation, but culturally and in terms of blood, they were intermingling all through their history. But when the Belgians came in, they issued an ethnicity identity card. So today you're Hutu, and then you're Hutu for the rest of your life. Tutsi the same way. So that basically racialized the identity that day. And that blew up when they became independent, and also at the genocide. So the genocide was, families killing each other basically at their homes, teachers killing their pupils, doctors killing their patients. So there was no front line except where you were living. And when I looked at that picture of the landscape, it was impossible to imagine people working together after such a atrocity. But because it's so hilly, because I knew that people were not well off, and you couldn't buy machines to cultivate the land, and you couldn't bring in the machines in there anyway because it's so hilly, even if you could afford it. So it meant that they had to work together in order to till that land. But after that genocide, how could you possibly do it? So it was to find out what the social structure was of that country. And then further along the research, realized that 70% of the population was women after the genocide, because men were either killed or in jail. But before the genocide, women couldn't own the land or have a business. So all of a sudden, they had to come out and rebuild and reconstruct their devastated land. So my focus became, so how did they rebuild, and how did women participate in that rebuilding without any prior, well, they were working, they were always working, they were always contributing, but not legally or not in the forefront of the efforts. So when we first went there with the funding from the Deborah Nodum Fund, which is a research travel fund from Architectural League of New York, they gave us money to go study that. And so we looked for female organizations who are investing in the rebuilding of the land, and found a bunch of people and decided to work with one of them. So that's the short version of it.
Yeah, this leads beautifully into the next question, because with 70% of women kind of making up the population, the majority of it, at least actively in social life, in the workforce, in the society. And since you started working with organizations that were primarily engaged in occupying women, or working with them, how do you think this shift in the labor workforce from men to women, shift in the ownership of land from men to women, or at least opening up the idea of ownership to women, influenced how the built environment, or I wouldn't say the urban fabric, but if that applies, changed when there was this shift in the demographic?
So Rwanda as a government is really good at tapping into the images that the donor nations want to see in the recipient countries. So 70%, more or less, of the federal budget is coming from the aid from the foreign countries in Rwanda. So that has a huge impact on the policy making, and of course how the properties, the land rights, participation, and women's participation in politics, and all of that plays out in Rwanda. And something like 60 to 70% of the parliament is women, and that is, decided. It's a set number that you have to fill, and that's the largest female population.
So it's
in the
reserved. It's like a
parliament
quota for.
yeah, exactly. So that's the number one in the world. And whether that is really played out in terms of women's voice being heard or not is up for debate, but at least they're represented. and it's quite different in the rural areas still. Women are able to own land and get inheritance from their parents when they pass away, which wasn't possible before 2005. But still, the hierarchy is quite huge between men and women in the rural areas. So we try to hire as many women as possible in the construction work, engage them in the skills training sessions during the construction, so that they're not just carrying cement bags or soil or rocks, which is an easy work, which means that you get paid less. But we try to engage them in masonry or creating the cage for the reinforced concrete columns and beams, stuff like that, for welding, so that they can get paid more, and they are skilled laborers. But that's still a very small portion that we can reach, and majority are still, second-class citizens. That's a crappy thing to say, but in terms of the power hierarchy, it's still quite the same, patriarchal.
So, Yutaka, speaking more architecturally, if we were to get into a day in your life when you're working on site as an architect, engaging with people, engaging with different contractors, and you've built a range of different institutions, right, from educational institutions to housing. From a more research academic perspective, knowing that there's a certain history of colonization in the region, how do you differentiate between the local and the non-local building practices? I speak that because I come from a country that was colonized, and in the city where I'm at, which is India's first World Heritage City, we get to see a range of buildings. So we have your traditional vernacular housing, which is very climate adaptive, which is uh, in a very simplistic way, a kind of a row housing. And then you have your Mughal period, the Islamic period. So we have our mosques and tombs and everything. We have the citadel. And then came the period of colonization. So we had the birth of an entire cantonment region, getting military inside the city. And you have all your colonial bungalows and your schools and your public buildings started changing. And then, of course, the era of post-independence modernization. So in a place like Rwanda, how do you see that influence of colonization quite literally in buildings? And then my second question after that is, when you're designing and when you're building on site, how do you logistically communicate these complex architectural ideas to people on ground, both in terms of your skilled labor force, your unskilled labor folks, and if there are intermediary contractors who kind of facilitate the bridging of the execution and the design part?
Okay, there we go. As you know, the colonial influence is huge anywhere where it has been colonized. I'm speaking from Tokyo right now. I don't know if you know that the airspace sky is owned by the US. So the Japanese planes cannot fly over Tokyo because there's American base near Tokyo, which includes the Tokyo area. And then when you land into Tokyo, you have to go around it. So we are still living under colonial practice. So it's not, whether you're colonized and then not colonized, it's like somewhere in between all the time, it seems. Anyway, so after the Belgians came, before the Belgians came, all the buildings were circular. After the Belgians came, all the buildings are square. That's the most easiest thing to look at architecturally. But Belgians thought that Rwandans living outside because it's so nice outside, it's a subtropical climate, and it's not that hot really. It gets quite cold in the morning and at night because the elevation is quite high, so you need a sweater. And it's in the shade, it's extremely, comfortable. So people spend a lot of time outside. But Belgians thought that that was uncivilized, savage, and not very modern. So they believed that if they made houses square, you can't have a porch. I don't know why they thought that. So they implemented this square plans everywhere. And we did this survey of a rural housing, and every single house was square. Anyway, so that's the easy thing to look at. But the pressure to modernize or pressure to be westernized has been internalized. It's not something that is implemented from the outside anymore. It's something that people strive to become. And that pressure certainly came from the outside, because in order to treat it equally from the Western countries, you have to appear modern. You have to appear as if you're westernized. So the house gets that pressure too. So the government also internalizes that too, and they have banned thatch buildings. You can't have thatch roof anymore. You have to have corrugated sheet metal for your roof, or you can have tiles, but tiles are really hard to work with. It just leaks no matter what you do. So, and it's heavy, so that the structure has to get heavier and more durable. And most of the houses are built with sun-dried adobe blocks, so you can't really hold that much weight, and it starts to sag. So really the only option now is the corrugated sheet metal. So that's something else that you can look at just by walking around, no thatch. And bricks, local burnt bricks are available, but not that durable, not that available. And people used to burn their own bricks in the rural areas. They would just pile up and then put soil over it and then burn it, but that has been banned as well. So you can tell that it's coming from the top. Development has been implemented in terms of policies, not in terms of market, not in terms of bottom-up efforts. It's more that policy decides you can build with this or you cannot build with this. And then it just trickles down, and you get these policies on your phone because the government has your phone number, and you get text message saying, from today on, you have to wear shoes, no matter what. From today on, you have to dry your dishes on the table, not on the grass, stuff like that. So your behavior, your household chores, your outlook, and the way you build, everything is regulated by the government, and it comes through your technology, your cell phones. So it's not just the architecture. It seeps into your psyche. Your identity becomes part of the modernization machine. One thing that did change though recently, so the adobe blocks were also banned, and that's really the only material that's realistic to build with in rural areas, because Rwanda doesn't have, well, it does have a little bit, but not really reliable. They don't have much building materials locally: cement, steel, glass, plastic, petroleum, tiles, trees, wood. All of them are imported. And that adds tariff on top of it. And like I said, it's extremely hilly. So, and then there's no ocean. So everything has to go through the land, through these like really hilly terrain. And that adds to the transportation cost. So the cost of construction is said to be about 30 to 40% more than Kenya. And that makes it really hard. The hills, the cost, the lack of materials, all of that makes it really hard to build. So in the rural areas, the Adobe blocks is really the only choice that you have to build with. And that was banned because it doesnn't look developed. And of
So
course, there
banned
are
by
other reasons.
what? Is it banned
By
by
the
the
government.
government? Oh,
So in a city center, it was banned, and it was expected to be expanded to the other areas, in the rural areas as well. And of course, the reason on the surface was that it's not structurally sound, it's not sustainable, but really, we are guessing, but really, they don't like it because it doesn't look developed. But so that was, I think, 2000. When was that? 2016 or something. And then it was reversed because the architectural and construction sector got together. There were 5 companies or institutions or offices that got together and revamped the building code for the Adobe blocks. They made the shape of it regular, and they made the straightness, the manufacturing process more regularized, so that you can counter the policy and you can make an argument that this could be viable building material for the rural areas. And they overturned the policy, and that was like the first time, one of the first times that I saw that architecture actually making a difference at the policy level, on the siding with the poor and siding with the people who can't afford to access cement and steel that are imported. So that was really encouraging. And so, yeah, that's something that we are trying to also build with and, train. No, we don't really train, to run a workshop with the builders in the rural areas so that they have access to that knowledge.
it's interesting you
And the
mentioned
second,
something about the circular, the tubular houses, because we have an equivalent of here as well. And in Gujarat, where I'm from, we had a massive earthquake, 7.6 Richter scale in 2001. And the more arid desert part of the region where it originated, the original building type it was called bungas, but these are circular huts made with mud, adobe, um, with thatch roofs. And those were the only ones that survived. Everything else that was in in a rectilinear orthogonal format actually did not. But these huts, then of course there's a lot of research done, a lot of academic papers done, a lot of structural analysis done, which eventually proved that because of the form of these huts, because of the thatched roof, because of lighter roofs, and the circular form of it, they were inherently seismic resistant. And that eventually, then of course tourism comes in, and now if you go to that region, if you want to stay in a particular resort, or there's a desert festival that happens, you would see a lot of these huts and small developments coming up, which are now starting to monetize on the circular form, because it
of course,
it you learn either by doing or by by experience. And experience said that, well, these have a lot of scientific backing to why they existed in this region and why they were built out of mud and why the roofs were lighter. But similar in terms of how the colonization, or I think just modernization broadly, and the development of concrete kind of changed how uh, buildings were built, and all these vernacular farms then take a different life as just being tokens of a distant memory, and they just exist as relics. But yeah, just a little towards there.
the same in Rwanda. You can have thatch roof if it's in the tourist context. So I don't know if you've seen Hotel Rwanda, the movie. That is based on Hotel de Mille Collines, this touristy big hotel. And if you go to the pool, the poolside cabana is thatch. but you cannot use that for real, residential housing. So yeah, that's a token for sure. Then your second question was the communication. How do you communicate with the skilled, unskilled government people? I think that has become more of the focus of at least my interest in the work that we do. We have, I taught at the National University in 2011, and students speak, so at the time of the genocide, there were 5 or 6, my students at the time. So they had to leave the country. They were refugees in other countries. So they spoke at least Kinyarwanda, which is the Rwandan language, and English, French, and whatever the country's language was where they were being a refugee. So 4 languages. They're extremely smart. If you spoke that many languages in the States, you would have plenty of job offers, but over there it's normal. But then there is no architectural text in Kinyarwanda about Africa that I could find back then. So I asked my students so I brought a bunch of small cameras and gave it to them and asked them to go out and take pictures of their spaces where they live and write poems about them, because they didn't have a theory book about Rwandan spaces, and I wanted them to start their own theory, architectural theory in their language. But I needed to be able to read it, so I asked them to write in English. But they did an amazing job, and I thought their images would be better because you just had to click and take a picture. But then their images weren't that interesting. They were like wonky, and they had fingers in front of them and all that stuff. But their poems were breathtaking. So we made videos and we made a book, and that kicked off the thinking that this needs to be communicated, how they're thinking about spaces, that how they are they're wanted to develop, but at the same time, they're not allowed to speak about the genocide. They're not allowed to speak about their struggles by policy. So it has to come out in the poetic or artistic or architectural ways, not through direct language or through direct policies. So that kicked off how the thinking about how we could use architecture as a process, and also to provide a space and time to communicate among the people who are not allowed to talk about certain things. So we definitely use the site and time of the construction to bring people together and work together and learn skills, but also communicate with each other how they wish the houses were this way, or they wished the way the neighborhood was run was this way, because they're not allowed to speak up against the government. In 2015, we organized the conversations between the people who were the genocide survivors and also the genocide um, perpetrators. And brought them together as what comes as because could have just, if they wanted to if they wanted forgiveness, the perpetrators, they could have just given money, just helped the survivors farm or something. But they decided that was their idea. They wanted to build houses for the survivors. And I was just really curious, why did it have to be a house? But they said, well, how can you ask for forgiveness from someone who doesn't even have a house? That's one thing that you need. And anybody can build houses. And that was like really striking, because really anybody can build houses, but they all build their own houses over there. And I think most of the world builds their own houses. We are the only ones really who separated, ourselves from the construction process. So it was their idea, and Dr. Sasaki helped them fundraise and then built it. And so they communicated with each other, and our job was to just set up that stage or the platform to discuss the process of reconciliation through the lens of architecture. And yeah, there are other projects that we've done, but for me, it's architecture is more the means to the end in order to have that kind of conversation, so that people who can't be in the same room can be in the same room after that process. Because without participating in the process, they can't sit in the same space, because they're just so hurt and mad and just, yeah. So that has become a big part of our projects after that.
I want to take a little bit of a step back and go back to what you said in the beginning of the conversation. You said Rwanda is a aid-focused country, aid-focused region, and assuming the projects that you're doing are also aid-focused and supported by organizations which have a certain corpus to fund activities overseas, otherwise, to do some kind of socially responsible work. Can you talk about the role of this funding in your practice? And since you worked with the Kate Spade organization for so many years with so many projects, what is the role of that benefactor in enabling what happens on ground, and how do you navigate that aspect of practice?
Yeah. And my sense of it, understanding of it, has changed over the years. In the beginning, they were just somebody we needed, and they brought money, and they had their own aims. So, we had to negotiate. So Kate Spade's CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility Unit, built a handbag factory in Masoro, which is the village that we have been working in since 2008. And that was the first project that we did together in 2015. And they hire about 200 women to make handbags that are sold in Europe and the US and Japan after that. And they decided that they wanted to contribute to not just the workers in the factory, but also their families, and realized that they needed a hospital because the old one was struck by the lightning. And they hired us again to rebuild and expand the existing health center. And then they continued, and we worked with them with the school buildings and the community center. And I think that the example of the community center is the most telling, and allows me to talk about how my understanding of their role has changed from the beginning to now. So this is a big in terms of Rwandan context, big community center with 5 or 6 new buildings, and a basketball court and outdoor learning space and all of that. And it's unheard of in the rural areas. You can see them in the cities, but not in the rural areas. And they, from the beginning, they wanted to build a sports center. So it used to be called Masoro Sports and Learning Center. And in the beginning, I was like, why sports? They don't have water. They don't have sewer system. They don't have food. Like, who's going to come play basketball? Who's going to come play soccer if they don't have all that, the necessity? And realize that, you know, maybe I'm the one who is stereotyping the poor. They don't get to enjoy themselves if they can't get the necessities first. They have to develop first in order to have a leisure time. So I started to see where they're coming from once the project was done, and then all these people were just ecstatic about, you know, using the facilities and playing sports with babies on their backs and like running around, and it was really great. But that was still nagging in my head. Why do you build something that you don't need? And certainly Kate Spade and any kind of CSR, they have pressure from their donors, and also their buyers. Any one of us who may be buying their bags and jewelry and all that stuff, they want to see something public. They want to see something big and beautiful and modern. So they don't get to invest in like little houses that I may want to build because I work there. But the handbag consumers, they don't really know what the needs are, and they want to see something big and beautiful. So that's where Kate Spade is coming from as well. They have to satisfy both sides. So that was a pressure to build this large things. And then it really backfired. We couldn't find anyone to own the facility once it was built because it was too big and too expensive to run it. And the government didn't want it. They loved the project, but they didn't want to own it. They didn't want to pay for it. We were talking with a large local NGO. They agreed in the beginning. We started to pay them to start running and build up the program. And then they backed out. They didn't want to run it either. They were overwhelmed by the scale of it. Then Kate Spade started to, so we ended up running it for a year after we completed the construction. And at the same time, we helped Kate Spade to hire the director and the managers and people who can teach literacy in the library that we built, people who can teach yoga and basketball, all that. And it became Isuko, which is a local nonprofit organization that is the owner now. So they had to go all the way from the construction, the planning and management and maintenance. So now Kate Spade is committed to pay for the maintenance of it indefinitely. So that's one thing that set them apart from the rest of the CSRs. I don't think too many other companies would do that. They don't commit to one tiny village in one tiny country in Africa to see it all the way through and commit to stay there. But that one thing about, you know, why the sports? Why do you care so much about these like unnecessary program just because your handbag buyers want to see it? So that was still nagging in my head. But when we talked to one of the players, female basketball players, she said something that was really interesting. She said she didn't know anything about basketball before the Kate Spade came and we built that structure. She probably didn't care much about it, but she said this was the first time that I spent time for myself, because before she was working and she was trying to get money. She was trying to care for her children. She was always pressured by the modernization, you know, regime to appear to be productive, because that's what we have to do when we are poor. Like, you have to constantly work and you have to show the images to the donors. I'm trying really hard, so you should give me money. So she is really working hard, but at the same time, we require them to show us that image. So she's like pressuring herself from the internally, but she's also being pressured from above to look like she is productive. But then for the first time, because of the basketball court appearing, she can be unproductive, right? Like, she doesn't have to look like she's working hard. She's just playing basketball. And that was possible because basketball is from the West. And if you're becoming westernized, you are being modern, and that's productive. So somehow this strange circle was complete and allowed her to spend time for herself and be caring for her well-being. And that was like, whoa, that's what this basketball is all about. It's not really for Kate Spade or for me or for our company. It's to allow these ladies to be unproductive, and I want to do that. I want to do more of that. So I think Kate Spade knows it now. Maybe they didn't know it before, but I think they know it now, and I think they would fund it. Fund the things that are unproductive.
As my last question, Yutaka, I was wondering if you could talk about the Rwanda housing project and what's next for the practice and for you.
Thanks. So Rwanda Housing Project is a survey, and it has multi phases. So we built earth bag houses, 2 of them back in 2013 and 15. And like I said, Rwanda doesn't have too much of local materials, certainly not cement. And we wanted to cut the use of the cement and use soil as much as possible. Soil and labor is what they got. So we wanted to maximize on that. And we learned about this earth bags, which is made of polypropylene, and it's like basically a pillow bag, and then you stuff local soil after you dig up the foundation, and then you stack them. So it's cheap, and it's extremely easy to build. Anyone can do it. We built one house, and the basic structure was done in 1 month, and the rest was like the roof and the stucco and stuff like that. Women can participate easily. So, and then the polypropylene is, petrochemical waste. So we thought we were being really clever about taking the Western waste and then making something really durable in the global South. And, that's, I thought that was smart. But at the end, because Rwanda doesn't have petroleum, they don't have petrochemical waste either, and we ended up importing and paying tariffs and transport, and it just ended up more expensive. So that was a mistake. But that mistake led us to realize that we didn't really know anything about how self-builders in Rwanda practiced, what kind of materials they had, what kind of houses they wanted, what kind of skills they had, what kind of properties they had, what was the soil type. None of that we knew. So we went back to square one in 2019 and went around the Masoro areas to survey about 370 homes and asked the residents about the building practice, as well as measuring the houses, surveying the materials, asking about how much money they had per month, at the same time asking about who built the house. So it was both about the demographic survey as well as the architectural survey. And in the beginning, we thought we were doing this so that we knew we could find out what kind of small fixes we could do. Is it the roof that they had a problem? Is it the windows that they had a problem? So that we didn't have to do this like sweeping, revamping of the housing policy, which Rwanda is doing. They have this policy called imidukudu, or villagization, and moving every single citizens from their villages into planned housing. And they claim that they have moved 50% of the population already, and by 2050 they're going to move 100%. But what happens is that you lose, family contact, you lose the sense of community, you're far away from the farmland because you're like in a tight, like an American, suburban type housing now. So it's far away from the job site, it's far away from schools and all of that. So we thought we would find out what kind of small fixes we could do instead of going to a big development. But turned out, after doing the survey, we realized that we couldn't do that either. The issues were more fundamental. Many of the houses didn't have foundations, and they were just, soil, and then they start building mud brick walls, and they didn't have gutter. That we could fix, but the concept of the gutter, what it does in order to protect the ground so that the water doesn't just go into under the wall, why you need foundation, why you need the lintels, all of that, the more theoretical understanding of construction was not really, it was there. They probably couldn't afford to pay for it, but there are other ways to achieve. For example, building far away from the slope would protect the wall, stuff like that. So we realized that the issues were more fundamental. It wasn't about small fixes. So we ran a workshop about more theoretical thinking of that goes behind the construction. And in order to demonstrate what they have learned, we get them build with the improved block construction learning block on the. This is how you build the structure, the foundation. This is how you make the improved adobe blocks. This is how you put lintels and rafters and all that stuff. And they got the certificates on all that stuff. And at the same time, we were drawing them, all the houses. And it was measured by the architecture students in Rwanda. They went to, all the houses, 370 of them, and talked to the residents. And then those drawings for the sketches were brought to Syracuse University, where I was working at the time. And my students there, architecture students, put it into Rhino and Illustrator and InDesign, and made it into digital. And in that process of translating the sketches into a digital drawing, my students are learning about what the materials are available, what kind of forms, what kind of size, how many rooms, go to living with people in this particular house. The latrines are always outside. The shapes are always square, stuff like that. So that became their learning process about what happens in Rwanda. And they couldn't, CAD only allows you to make precise right angle, but none of the houses were in right angle. None of the lines were straight because they are all self-built and hand-built. So my students had to make straight lines first, and then make it intentionally squiggly, and make right angle and intentionally not right angle. So all that process was extremely interesting, and we were able to show that the work when was it? April, in Syracuse, in a exhibition and a panel discussion to share with everybody else. So again, that's one of the communication that you were asking me about earlier. How do we use architecture to communicate with the rest of the world what's happening, like what Rwandan people are doing already, in order to control their own built environment and use our projects like the Rwanda Housing Project to show that their agencies and their powers and their thinking behind building. So yeah, that would be something that we would definitely want to push next as well. I don't really know what we would do next, but it's less making nice buildings, but more about how to be at the same table.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing your experiences and your work, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Special thanks to Ayushi Thakur for the research and design support, and Kahan Shah for the background score. You can follow us on Instagram at arcofcenter and reach out to us through our website arcofcenter.com. That is ARCHOFFCENTRE. And thanks for listening.